Hi everyone, welcome back. So far we have covered the core concepts of Spring Security from authentication and authorization to JWT. So over the last couples of videos, we have covered a lot of information with regard to Spring Security. If you go to my playlist for the Spring Security, you will find all these videos, and I am very happy. So, if you haven't watched those explanation videos yet, I highly recommend checking them out first. The link is in the video description below. Now it is time to move from theory to practical. In this video, we are diving into hands-on implementation of Spring Security, where we will apply what we have learned step by step. If you find this video helpful, do not forget to share, like, and subscribe to support the channel. Also hit the bell icon so that you will never miss an update from me. So let us get started. So far, this is a continuation of our banking application or banking service. Remember, we started a series on Spring Boot from beginner to intermediate, where we are building a banking application. Now it is high time we secure our banking application. That is why I have started this series on Spring Security. Before we get started, I want to point out several things. One, it is good to watch the previous videos so that you may be updated, or so that you may be in sync with what we are going to do. So I want us to start this series on Spring Security hands-on. So the first thing that you need to do is to add a dependency for Spring Security. This is the dependency. Go to the spring.io, get the dependency called Spring Boot Starter Security. Spring Boot Starter Security. After that, you need to add two more dependencies. That is JSON Web Token. This is for the JWT. So these are the two dependencies that you need to add. The first one is JWT API version 0.12.6. The other one is JJWT-IMPR version 0.12.6, and the scope for this is runtime. So those are the two dependencies that you need to add. I hope you have been following up with my Spring Boot series. If this is your first time implementing Spring Security, you need to add the dependencies for Spring Data JPA, because we are going to interact with the DB, Spring Boot Starter Web, because this is a web application. Then you also need to add a Spring Boot Starter validation in case you need to do the validation for your input fields. You also need to add the driver for MySQL Connect Java. So those are the dependency. Also, I recommend that you add Rombook so that your code may be clean. So those are some of the dependencies that you need to add. Now, I want us to go into the entities, create a new Java class. This time around, this will be an enum. Call this class uproll. So this will be the class that will be used for storing the rows. So now, under this enum, we are going to add various roles. The first one is role underscore user. The other one is role underscore admin. So our application will support two roles, role user, role admin. If you want to add more roles into this list, feel free to do that. The other class that we are going to create is role class. So this is a class that will be mapped into our database table for the roles. So new Java class, and I will call this role. So the very first thing that I want to do is I want to annotate this with @entity. I also want to annotate it with @getter, @setter. I also want to add or argument constructor, or args constructor, and @no args constructor. No args constructor. I also want to map this class to a table called so this will be mapped into a database table called roles. Okay, let us continue. So the first thing that I am going to add with regard to role is role ID. So I will say private integer role ID. The other class I am going to add is private app role. So I am going to call my enum here app role. Then I am going to call this role name. The other field that I need is a set of users. So private set of user. I am going to create this user class in few seconds. So I am going to call this users is equals to new hash set. So basically I have the role, I have the user, and I have the ID. So those are some of the things, some of the classes that I need. I also need to create a constructor. So public role. Inside here I will pass app role. So this is basically the role name, and I'm going to say this dot role name is equals to role name. So that is a constructor. So I also want to convert this role enum to a string, and so I will say private string get role name as string, and here I am going to just return role name dot to string. And I also don't want this, so I am going to ignore this, or rather I don't want this to be included in the JSON response. Therefore I will put annotation at JSON ignore. Now this class requires a primary key. So it requires a primary key. So I am going to annotate role ID with @id. Then I am also going to describe how this primary key will be generated. So I will say @generated value. So strategy is equals to generation type dot identity. So that will be the strategy for generating this. Then I will add I will map this role ID to a column in the database table called role ID. So I will map this to a column called role underscore ID. And that is it for the role ID. Then for the case of role name, I will have to do several things. The first thing that I will do is to prevent this field from being included in the toString method. So to prevent this field from being included into the toString method, so I will say at toString dot exclude toString.exclude. Also, I will add at enumerated into bracket enum type dot. This has got various options, but in this case I want to select a string. So this means that this field will be stored as a string in the database table. So you use this property at enumerated enum type dot string to store enum values as strings in the database. That is the role name. So I also want to define the column at column. So the name will be role underscore name. I also want to define the length to be 20. So the length of this will be 20. So that means that it cannot exceed 20 characters. Now, the other interesting thing that I want to go to is these users here. Remember, we have not created the user, but this is some sort of relationship whereby we are relating users to role. Basically, what we are doing here is we are creating some relationship between users and role. So as you know, one user can have many roles. So I am going to define a relationship called at one to many relationship. So I will add mapped by role. I am going to explain all this in a minute. Then I am going to add fetch and the fetch type will be lazy. I want to use lazy. And also cascade. This will be cascade type dot merge. I want to merge. Then I want to add one more property called JSON back reference. So this is from JSON. It is called JSON at JSON back reference, and then at toString dot exclude. So basically, I want to explain these properties one by one. So we have defined at one to many, and this defines a one to many relationship with the user entity mapped by role. What does this mean? This means that the role field in the user's class owns this relationship. In other words, inside the user class, we are going to create a field called role that owns this relationship. Then we go to fetch type dot lazy. So what does this fetch type dot lazy do? Basically, when for this fetch type dot lazy, users will only be loaded on demand. Users will only, not users, but other roles will only be loaded on demand. So basically, there are several fetch type. There is fetch type dot lazy, fetch type dot eager, but basically what this will mean. Remember, this users is just a relationship field. Therefore, that means that For this fetch type.resi, the users will only be loaded on demand. Then we go to cascade type.merge. Basically, what does that mean? This means that when role is updated, the related user entity will also be updated. The related user entity will also be updated. Then we have at JSON back reference. What is the significance of this annotation? This one prevents infinite recursion during JSON serialization. Remember, there are some serialization that happens, and this is whereby an object, there is that conversion between object and Java class and back. So to prevent infinite recursion during JSON serialization, we define at JSON back reference. Then we also have at toString method. I have explained that exclusion, and also I have also explained the JSON ignore. What is the purpose of this JSON ignore? I told you earlier that this prevents this method from being included in the JSON response. So this method here will not be included in the JSON response. Now, it is time for us to create the users class. It is time for us to create the users class. So, I want to go and create the users class. New Java class. I will call this user. I will call this user. Let me go to the role and copy all these. So I forgot to add a name here. So there should be name. Name is equals to roles. Now I want to go to this users table. Remember, we are setting up entities. The name will be users. Name will be users. So under this, I want to add more and more fields to this. So the first thing is, let me copy something from here. So remember, I explained everything, and therefore this should go, because let us import this user. Let us import this set, and in so doing, this user is automatically detected. So I want us to go back and add various fields. The first one is user ID. User ID. The second field that we are going to add is username. Private string username. The other field that we are going to add is email address, but before that, I want us to do something around the username. So the first thing that we are going to do is to define at not blank. So username is required. These are just Hibernate validation. We are also going to define at size. Username should have a max size of 20. Then let us define this at column. At column, this is username. The column name is username. So that is all about username. I want us to go to the other field called email. So private string email. I want to do the same for the username, except that in this case we are going to modify the size to be a bit longer, and we are going to add this as email, and we are going to add at email annotation, so that this may be verified as a valid email address. The other field that we are going to add is password. We are going to add password. So private string password, and for the password we are going to add the password should not be blank. So I also want to have a size of at least at maximum 120 characters. And I also want to add this as password. Also remember to add at JSON ignore, so that this password may not be included in the JSON during the serialization. So that is password. I also want to create other classes, private boolean, account, non-locked. I will set this to true. This means that this account is not locked. So I want to copy various boolean. So I will also create another boolean called account non-expired. Account non-expired. That is also true. No, that one should also be true because this account is non-expired. Credentials non-expired. Credentials non-expired. This is true. Also enabled. Private boolean enabled. Remember, we are going to build a very comprehensive user management system. So in this case, your account should not be locked, it should not be expired, the credentials should not be expired, and your account should be enabled for you to be able to log into your account. Then I also want to add more boolean field, not boolean but rather string, private string two-factor secret. So if the two-factor authentication is enabled, this field will restore the two-factor secret, or rather two-factor code. Then there is private boolean is two-factor enabled. Remember, by default this should be false. We are going to build a comprehensive user management and authentication system whereby we have the liberty or the control over the mode of authentication. We can allow multi-factor authentication, or rather two-factor authentication, other than password. Tell us, prove further that you are whom you claim to be by proving the ownership of a device where this two-factor secret will be shared. Then I also want to add a private string sign up method. So there are various methods. Remember, I told you that we are going to implement OAuth2, that is open authentication, where you can log in via, or you can sign up via third party. So sign up method may be email, Gmail, GitHub, etc. Then I also want to add the role to a user. So I will say private role. In this case, I want to define this role field. Do you remember in this role, there was a mapped by role, this column that owns this relationship. We have created it here. And with this regard, I want to define a relationship called at many to one relationship. And therefore, I want to define fetch type. This time around, I am going to define a fetch type to eager. I am also going to define cascade and define this cascade type dot merge. Then below it, I am going to define at join column into bracket name is equals to role underscore ID reference column. Referenced column is role underscore ID, and then I want to prevent infinite recursion during JSON serialization. I have told you one way to do that is to add at JSON back reference at JSON back reference, and I also want to exclude this from toString. So I will say at toString dot exclude. So let me explain this in a minute. So at minute 1, I told you there are various types of fetch. So this is fetch type dot eager. Remember, earlier on we used the fetch type dot lazy, which will ensure that you load an entity or rather relationship on demand, but fetch type dot eager ensures that the role will be loaded automatically. The role will be loaded automatically. I also want to talk about this one, JSON back reference. This one I have already explained it to you. So eager loads the role immediately whenever a user is fetched. And we also have at JSON column. So at JSON column, this defines a foreign key. And in this case, the foreign key mapping will be based on the role ID column. And the referenced column on that, the reference column basically is the column on the columns that rather contains our foreign key. Remember, inside the role, we have a table called, we have a column called role ID that defines a foreign key relationship. Other than this, I want us to continue. I want us to define the date field. So I will say private date time. So this one I will define it as local date time, and I will call this creation date. I will call this created date. So, and I also want to define this at creation timestamp, at creation timestamp to handle automatically creations of this date. And this column at column, so I want this updatable. You should not be able to update the date created. You should not be able to update the date created. I want to create one more column for the date, and I will call this local date time updated date. Updated date. Then up to that point, I hope we are together, and I hope you are following and you are doing things practically. So I also want to create a constructor user. I want to create a constructor. Therefore, I will say right click generate. I will say generate a constructor. So this constructor, I want to add username and email. So I want to add username and email. Those two, those are the two fields that I want to add inside my constructor. I also want public user int I. Now I also want to create equals method and hash code. Equals method and hash code. So I want to come here and don't know whether we can be able to generate it. generate equals and hash code. Next. So for this equals and hash code, for now I don't want the field to be included. I just want to finish. So I have this equals and hash code. So if this is equals to O, return true, and this O is our object. If O is null, so basically here I want to do one more modification. So I want to delete all this. Just say if not O instance of user, return false. Then instead of returning all these things, I want this to be a little bit simple. So let me delete all these things. We don't need them. We only need to return user ID is not equal to null and user ID dot equals user pass the object dot. So after passing the object, I want to say dot get user ID dot get user ID dot get user ID. So basically we have an error. So what is this error? User ID dot equals. So there is basically something we are not crossing. So remove that and also remove one extra bracket. We also need to remove this part here. Let us keep it simple. For the case of this one also, let us remove this one also. So let us return get class dot hash code, as simple as that. So basically that is it for this video. So I want to remove all the useless items. So let us go through this one more time. We have defined a user ID, which is a primary key. We have defined a username. We have defined an email, and we have also added Hibernate validation. We have defined a field for the password. We have defined various Boolean. The first one is account non-locked, account non-expired, credentials non-expired, and enabled is equals to true. Then we also have defined a two-factor secret. Is two-factor enabled false? Sign up method. We have also defined at minute one relationship between the users and the role. And basically, we have also defined a creation timestamp for created date and updated date. Then we have created two constructors. So we have created a constructor for user and email. Then we have created equals and hash code. So I want us to create one more constructor. So generate constructor. And in this case, I want us to include the username, the email, and the password. The username, the email, and the password. Also, I want us to add two more fields here. So I want us to store the expiry. I want a date field, private record date, and this field is for credentials expiry date. Credentials expiry date, and also another one for accounts expiry date. Let us import this record date. So this will be account expiry date. Account expiry date. What is the purpose of this field? The purpose of this field, basically, remember, there are some organization that requires that your password maybe expires after 1 month, so that you can change your password and blah blah blah. This is basically for security purposes. So I also want to enforce some constraints. So some of the constraints that I want to enforce is I want to define the username and the email to be unique. So that means that at any given time, we cannot have two people with the same email address. So the email is unique. And the password is unique. So unique constraints, and I am going to define at unique constraints into bracket column names. So the column name will be user name. The other column will be email. Column name will be email. And I am done with this. Now, having done that, I am done with the user entity. So that is it for the entity classes. Now I want us to go one step further and create a user detail service. So we saw that when we were going through the Spring security, we saw that the purpose of user details service is to get the user details. So basically, I want us to go inside here, inside the repositories, and create the role repository and also the users repository. So new Java class, this will be an interface. I am going to call this user repository, and this one is going to extend JPA repository. It is going to extend JPA repository. So here we pass the user, and then we pass the primary key type, which is integer. So we need to import this user from our entity classes, and we also need to define this with at repository. That is it. Now I want to do the same for the role. Let me create the role repository. New Java class, role repository. This one, I want to rename this. You just go and refactor rename. So this is going to be role repository, and this is going to be an interface, not a class. And this one is going to extend JPA repository. Let us pass the role, and the primary key type is integer. So let us import our role from our entity classes, and let us annotate this with at repository annotation. That is it for the repository. Now I want us to go a step further and look at the two methods, the two interfaces that we are going to implement. So the first interface, or the first so basically, once we have the user, what will happen is, remember, these are custom classes. We have created a custom class called user, but Spring Security is not aware of this custom class called user. How do we make Spring Boot be aware of our custom class called user? How do we make our Spring Boot to be aware of the custom class called user? Here is where user details comes into play. User details comes into play. So we are going to implement. Let me create a folder here, new Java package. I'm going to call this security. So here is where I want to create a new Java class, and I am going to call this user details. I am going to call this user details impl.java. User details impl. Basically, impl is for implementation. impl is for implementation, and I want it to implement. I want this one usually implements user details service. User details to implement user details. This user details is provided by Spring Security. So in this case, we are going to implement all these methods. It is good to implement all these methods. So also let us annotate this with at no args constructor, and also at data Lombok. So at data combines the getters and setters. So now I want us to define various things. I want us to define various things here. So the first one, let us define private static final long serial version ID, serial version UID. I will give it a value of long, because this is a long. Let me use primitive data type. I want to define another variable called private long ID, another variable called private string username, another variable called private string email, Now up to that point, I also want to define another field called private. These are the fields that are there in our users table. Private string password, and also I want this password to be JSON ignored at JSON ignore. Then I also want to define another field called private boolean is two-factor enable, is 2FA enabled. Then this one at override correction extends granted authority get. So this is get granted authorities. So instead of us returning null here, I will define one more field here, and this time round I am not going to override it. I am going to say to call it authorities. Going to call it authority. So remember we talked about granted authority, and this is used to get the user's permissions as authorities. Up to that point, I hope we are together. I want us also to create some constructor. So let us create a constructor here. Generate constructor. So what are the things that we are going to include? We are going to include ID, username, email, password, Boolean two-factor authentication, and we are going to include this granted authority. So let me break it down so that you can be able to see clearly in one screen. So I also want to create another constructor. I want to create another, not a constructor, but I want to bind now this one to, I want to bind this implementation to our custom user class so that the Spring security will be able to detect this. So what we do is we define public static user details IMPR user details MPR. Then I will say build. So what do I want to build? User. So an instance of user will be created inside. So this will map my user to user details IMPR. So I want to import my user from my entity. Basically, the first thing that I want to do is to define the granted authority. Granted authority. Let me expand my screen. Granted authority is equals to new simple granted authority. I told you the purpose of simple granted authority in our explanation video. Granted authority dot get role. Now I want also to pass this role as get role. Remember, this is an enum, but we want to get this role as a string. So dot get role name. So I don't know why this get role name as string is not coming. And remember, we have already defined this method in our roles. We have already defined this method in our role. So if we go to our entities, we go to role, there is this method called get role name as string. Get role name as string inside this role, and we have called our role here. We have called our role here. So that means that I expect the user to be able to get the role name as string. I expect the user to be able to get the role name as string. rather than just getting the role name. So basically, I think for now, let us say .get role name dot to string. Now let us define various things. Let us create a construct. Let us define a return. What will be returned? Return a new user detail IMPL. Inside here I will say user dot IMPL, return new user details IMPL. And have I terminated this method? Not terminated this method. So user dot get user ID, comma user dot get username, comma user dot get email, comma user dot get password, comma user dot is two-factor enabled, comma user dot now I want to create list of permission. So list dot of authority. So this list dot of authority. So I want to import this class. So basically, what I am doing is very simple. I am making Spring Boot be aware of our custom user entity. So it will be aware of our custom user entity. And I am creating an object of user detail implementation whereby I am passing the fields from our custom user entity. I am passing the fields of our custom user entity. So now I think this video is becoming too large, and I don't want us to have so big video. So guys, let us stop at that point. We are going to continue from there in the next video. Bye.